All right, today we're going to go ahead and conduct a review over Django REST framework and Django for making an API that will handle this library manager. Let's take a look at the README to see what it is that we have to do. So Django assignment, library management API with Django REST framework and PostgreSQL. All right, a couple of table of contents here. So it looks like I need to make a project called the library management project. It gives me a couple of the installations that I'll need to do. All right, it helps me with setting up token authentication, gives me the models that I'm going to need, the serializers I'm going to need, and then a couple of endpoints that I have to implement. All right, awesome. So it's pretty much giving me everything that I need to do to include the instructions. All right, so let's concentrate in creating this API behavior here. With that said, I'm going to go ahead and create my virtual environment. So python-m vmv.venv. This is going to give me my virtual environment, maybe. Python 3-m vmv.venv. There you go. Now I have my virtual environment. I'm going to run source.venv, bin, activate. That gives me my virtual environment, which I can now pip install -- upgrade pip to upgrade my pip. Uh, get away. All right. From there, I can pip install Django. I believe this gave me a couple of other installments that I'm going to need. Looks like I'll need Django REST framework. And I'll also need PsychoPG binary. All right. Once I have all of that set up, I can go ahead and create my Django project by running Django admin start project and then stating that the project that I want to start will be named, oh man, let's call it the library project. Okay, so this gives me this library project. I also have this books.json, which looks very similar to what a model is going to look like. Nice. In my library project, I have settings.py. There's really nothing that I need to change here, except for making sure that it connects to my database. I do have this Docker file that I'm going to utilize. Let me make sure that Docker is still going to work correctly. Great. And I do have a run server, which should be linking me over to my database container. Fantastic. So everything is set up here to be able to work properly when it comes to actually linking to my database. So the only thing that I need to do is go inside of settings, make sure I change this to PostgreSQL. My database, although running, is not following the appropriate name pattern. So let me go ahead and dive into this database, into this Docker file. And this database that I'm going to create, I want to go ahead and call it my library DB. All right. Let's make sure that database is running. I'm going to run docker stop db container. That should stop that container. If I run docker ps, we can see how that container is now gone. I'm going to remove the database image. All right. And I can go ahead and build my image. So I'm going to change directory into DB. From here, I'm going to run docker build, which is going to build my image with the name of database image within this context. All right, let me run docker ps to make sure that worked. It didn't. So there seems to be some sort of issue here. Let's see. Well, that's a warning, not an issue. So something else is going on here. Let's do Docker ps-a to make sure that we don't have anything still in here that is recent. So this is from 3 weeks ago and then 4 weeks ago. All right, nothing that I necessarily need to worry about here. This is utilizing Postgres 15. And just to make sure if I run, oh, all I did was build the image. I didn't actually run my database. So let's do that. And I just realized that I have this run DB portion that I could have utilized. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. That's going to build my database. There you go. If I run Docker PS, there's my database container. All right. Now I have my database container, which means I could go into my settings.py and start interacting with this database engine. For my database, I'm going to make sure this is the library DB. I thought I put this to sleep, but I guess I didn't. All right. Where I'm going to have a user be of student, a password be of student, and a host, where my host is actually my database container. All right. This should connect me to the appropriate database utilizing PostgreSQL with PsychoPG. Before I start making any of the apps or rendering any of the other application, I'm going to run this run server portion to make sure that everything works properly. I'm actually going to do this on a separate terminal. All right, so it seems to have failed to build. Failed to solve, cancel context, canceled source. Okay, that has to do with something else. All right, but my state reloader is actually working. Let's go over to localhost at port 8000. All right, and my Django application is now running. With that, I can run Docker exec dash, oh, okay. Let's do Docker exec dash IT into my Django container utilizing bash. And let's run Python, manage py, migrate. All right, all of the migrations happened. So my database is actually connected. Everything is working great. Fantastic. The only issue that we have now is that my database is actually contaminated with the inappropriate authentication user. So I'm actually going to have to take all of this down. So I'm going to Docker stop DB container. Let me stop my Django container first. All right. So now everything is stopped. I have my project ready to go, and I can actually go ahead and start developing because I know everything can be connected properly. There was a lot of setup process there. Does anyone have any questions regarding the setup before we start working on the project itself? All right. Doesn't seem like we have any questions. Let's go ahead and start. So now in this settings.py, actually, in here, I need to pip freeze requirements.txt. All right, so now I have my requirements.txt. I can go ahead and start making some apps. So we have an app for library management system, an app for the client, and an app for a book management. Let's see. Which one is each one supposed to handle? Doesn't seem like we need that many apps. I would say we only need two, one for the book and one for the client. We may need a rental app, but I'm not sure. Yeah, we should probably have a rental app. Okay, so let's go ahead and do Python, manage py, start app of a book app. We'll run Python, manage py, start app for a client app. And we'll run Python, manage py for a rental app. All right. So the rental app seems like it's going to be our connecting table for a many-to-many relationship between books and rentals. Maybe I am wrong here. Did that explain a little? Did they explain anything about the models in the assignment? Doesn't seem like they did. Let's see. If I get a book, here's all of my books. Here's my client endpoints, and here's my rental endpoints. Get post. Okay, create a new rental for a client to rent out a book. So it doesn't seem like it's a many to many, more of a many to one connection. Okay, got it. Sorry, I'm doing a lot of thinking in my head to make sure that this functionality is accomplished. And just so everybody's tracking, if at any point you have a question, please make sure you just interrupt me, right? This is a review, so it's not like our standard lectures. You can ask me a question at any time. Here, I'm
Uh,
going to go ahead
can-
and, oh, go for it.
Sorry. Can I ask you, how did you decide on what should be an app when you were saying if the rental should be an app or not?
Oh, good. How did I decide on what should be an app? That's a
Yeah.
great question. Yeah, so when I was first looking at this, my mentality was, okay, well, the book itself, right? It's going to carry maybe a couple of fields and titles, and we could look at book.json to see what the book looks like, right? So it doesn't seem very complicated. But as I was thinking about the different API views that we have to be able to handle, our book is a read-only application, whereas rentals is actually triggering all of CRUD, right? That falls into the book. So my rental is going to require quite a bit of more logic and elbow grease to be able to apply all of CRUD than my book app would. So I don't want to get these two mixed up. And when I'm thinking about all these different API views, all the different methods that I'm going to have to implement, and the logic that I'm going to have to implement behind serializers, I can already foresee that rentals is probably going to be just the views file itself is probably going to be a view file that carries somewhere around 100 lines of code. And I don't want those 100 lines of code to possibly interfere with my book app. So I'm just doing isolation, right? Making sure that book is isolated. All of my read-only behavior is isolated. And then CRUD is also isolated with my rental application. So that was my decision base. The models themselves, they aren't too complicated to the point where I can't put them inside of the same models.py file. But the behaviors that each one of them are accomplishing are drastically different. Does that answer your question, Erica?
Yes, thank you.
Of course. All right. Any other questions? All right. Let's go ahead and keep pushing forward here. All right. So in setting stop PY, I'm going to go ahead and start installing my apps. I know I'm going to need REST framework. I know I'm also going to need REST framework dot auth token. And then I'm going to need my actual apps. We have the client app. We have the book app. We have the rental app. All right. From there, I think they actually provided me quite a bit of code that I could add here, specifically regarding token authentication. So I can go ahead and add that here. So there's all of my token authentication bases there. And it doesn't seem like they help me with handling the user, but luckily we know that the user has to be an auth. Um, oh wow, I totally forgot what it is. I may have to look at the curriculum now. Let's see. I used to know this off the top of my head. Auth user model. There you go. That's what I was looking for. So here we are with auth user model, which should be mapped to the client app dot client. All right, for allowed host, I'm going to allow any. I am going to allow localhost. And I believe that should do the trick for allowed host. Let me see here. Gonna take a look at one of my old settings.py just to make sure I'm not messing up that allowed host. Let's do cat. Go into our Pokédex project. Okay, there's my database engine. All the trainer apps. Ah, there it is. So it's localhost and port 0000. All right, there you go. So now my application's ready to go. Everything's set up and tied together. I can start actually developing my models. Specifically, I want to start with my client app, where in my client app, I'm going to grab the model. And here, I'm going to state, hey, from django.contrib.auth.models, I want to import the abstract user. I'm going to make my client be of abstract user. I'm going to overwrite the email to make unique equal to true. I'm going to set my username field to my email, and I'm going to state that required fields are of none. All right. That should be it for my client application there. I could worry about views and serializers if I really wanted to. I think they have a serializer for the client. Did they allow one? They do allow a serializer for the client. So I could worry about this now, but I think I'm going to go ahead and worry about it later. Let's make sure that this all works up until this point. I'm going to change directory to DB and make sure I can run my database. Let's run Docker PS. My database is up and running. And here I'm going to go ahead and run my server. So we're getting here an error saying that, hey, I have a dependency error. Let's go ahead and fix that. That is okay. Here I'm going to go ahead and run docker exec Django container bash. I'm going to run Python manage py, make migrations, Python manage py, migrate. And that should also fix my run server script. And it seems like it didn't. So I may have to destroy it and run it again. So I'm going to run docker stop Django container Let's go ahead and run that server one more time. All right. And now my rocket ship is running. Let's do this. All right, perfect. So my client app is actually working. It's been installed. It's inside of my database. I can take a look at my migrations that I just made. And if I look at the migrations that I just made, here's all of the token proxies that I'm going to need. And for authentication, we have my client app for authentication. All right. Let's start working through some of these functionalities. I'm going to worry about the clients first. First, I'm going to worry about this sign up. I'm actually going to take all of this. Why not? I'm going to bring it over to urls.py, which currently doesn't exist. So let's fix that. And in urls.py, I'm going to go ahead and create this Thunder string that will hold all of those methods that I am going to implement. From here, I'm going to go ahead and import. Actually, it's from Django.urls. I will import path, make my URL patterns. Boom. Where I'm going to have the path of sign up, which will go to my sign up view. I will have my path of login, which will go to my login view. And I will have my logout, which will go to my logout view. I'll worry about the retrieve later on. For now, I'm just going to go ahead and state that from .views. I'm going to import signup, login, and logout, all which don't exist just yet. Come over to my views. In here, from REST framework, .views, I want to import API view. From REST framework, .response, I want to import response. And then from REST framework, I will import status as S. Finally, from .models, I'll import my client. And I guess this does say that we have to create a serializer, so I might as well create the serializer now. Let's go to touch client app serializers.py. Oh, touch is not a command, or whatever it is that I typed here is not a command. All right. Let's go ahead and open up this serializers.py. And here I can say from REST framework dot serializers. I can import my model serializer. And from dot models, I want to import my client. From here, I can go ahead and make my class of client serializer, which inherits from the model serializer, holds a class meta, where my model will be of client, where my fields will be of all. And from here, I can go ahead and add some functionality in here. So let's actually talk about the model serializer methods. So drf model serializer. All right, so the model serializer. Here's the way it works. It gives me a way to inspect the model serializer, specify which fields. Fantastic. Okay, I can grab all. I can also exclude some things. Great. It gives me a depth portion. Depth often should be set to an integer value that indicates depth of relationship. Oh, that's cool. Um, let's see. Specify URLs. All right, so here's some read-only fields, all right, that we can also specify. But there's got to be, if there's a read-only, I would assume that there's also a write-only. See, mouse fields which have editable false, set and autofills will be set read-only by default. Okay, that's not it. Let's see, additional keyword arguments. Boom. Here's something for password that we're going to need. Right? We want to make sure that our password is only right. We don't want it to be exposed in the read functionality. So I'm going to go ahead and add that. And if you take a look here, this is actually giving us a way to handle the creation of a user as well. Okay, so I think they know that a lot of people run into these issues whenever they're working with authentication. So they give you this as batteries included. So here we're going to go ahead and create. What we are creating is a client where we're going to pass in the username and password. And actually, instead of doing this here, because in here, what we should be grabbing should be the email. Let's see. So there's email, username. Okay, that works. And we can run user.full clean and then save. And that should return our user. So here's my serializer that handles all of my creation functionality. I'm sure we have some questions about this. At this point, does anyone have any questions over how I created the serializer for the user? I'm trying to talk as I'm doing all of this to the best of my ability, but I'm sure I'm staying a little quiet every now and then.
Can you explain what the extra quarks is doing, the write or the read only functionality?
Yeah, absolutely. So here we're specifying that we want all fields from the client. The client comes with a field of password, right? But this password, I don't want it to be exposed to everybody. Somebody sends a GET request because if they send a GET request and we expose their passwords with every request, that's just not a very secure site, right? We want to make sure that this password is never exposed to the user again. So what we do is we tell our serializer through extra quirks that the attribute of password is only for the writing condition, right? And writing condition refers to create. All right, this means that this does not allow for put either. This is write only, right? There's an edit value that you can pass in your quarks or an editable value that you can pass in quarks to state that to true if you want to update the password as well. This create functionality, and this is just whenever a user is being created, by default, we don't want it to be created as if it was a regular model because the password wouldn't get hashed, right? We want the password to be hashed whenever we create a user. So because we want the password to be hashed, we're going to utilize the set password function. Does that answer your question, Erica?
Yes, it does. And that hashing happens because the model was inheriting the abstract user.
So that hashing happens because of the set password function.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so when we inherit from the abstract user, we
Mm-hmm.
get this new way of creating the object, which is create user. And this create user function, whenever we pass in a password, it actually uses this set password inside of it. Right? So that's why when we inherit from the abstract user, we get this create user functionality.
Gotcha.
Okay.
Thank you.
Of course. Any other questions? Okay, well, since we're creating everything here, we might as well also bring in the token into this process. Let's go ahead and state that from REST framework dot auth token dot models, I want to import a token. And once this user is saved, I'm just going to go ahead and do token dot objects dot create, where I'm going to create a token. And this token specifically is just looking for a user to match to. So in this create functionality, we'll go ahead and state that user is equal to the user. And that will also generate a token for us. All right. Let's see here. I kind of want to handle the token inside of the serializer as well. But at this point, this is some less important functionality that we need to cover for the review. We could make this super fancy. I'm not going to as of right now. I'm just going to go ahead and continue with the application to hit some more of the more important vital parts for the assessment. All right, so here's my client serializer. My client serializer is actually inheriting. It's grabbing all of the fields. It has extra quarks for being able to create. Well, now let's start working on some of these views. Right? I have my class of signup, which is an API view. It's going to accept a couple of requests, but for now, I'm going to create the rest of them. We should have my class of login. We should have my class of logout. All right. Now I know that my signup view is only supposed to receive a post request. So I'm going to go ahead and make self request, grab the data, which is request.data. I'm going to make a copy of said data. And then I'm going to go ahead and create my new client, which should be my client serializer, where data is equal to data. And I'm actually going to pass in this partial. I'm not sure if I need a partial equals true. I'm not going to pass that in. I'm going to state if new client dot is valid. And actually, because of this is valid, I don't need this full clean process. I'm going to go ahead and remove that. So if client dot is valid, then I'm going to return. Let's take a look here. I want to see if there's a way to access the client itself. Let's see. New client dot save. Oh, and this should give me the client because that's what returns my user. And now let's take a look at the return functionality. What is it that it expects? Well, this expects me to return post, create a new client with a token in the library. Okay, so it doesn't really give me much of a return expectation. So I'm just going to do response, where I'm going to have email, which should be my client dot email, and then my token, which should be my client dot auth token dot key. All right, let me backtrack here. I'm going to take a look at my UR or my serializers. My serializers seem to be working. I forgot to add an else statement here. Let's return a response of new client.errors. And then I could add my statuses. Of 201 created, and then my status of HTTP 400 bad request. All right. My serializer should be good to go for handling the creation, including the creation of a token. My view should be tied to my URLs for my sign up view, and now I just need to tie it to the project. So in my URLs for my project, I'm going to need my include. Here I'm going to call path, which should have API slash clients slash, and this should include my client app.urls. All right, let's see what is going on here. If I go to API slash v1 slash clients, oh, there's no v1. I should expect this to also return an error. Perfect. It is telling me that I need to either do sign up or one of the others. If I run sign up, it should give me an error saying, hey, this doesn't accept. Okay, perfect. So there you go. Okay, so it gives me the application JSON that I could send and send a post request. In here, I'm only going to pass in email, where my email will be fr@fr.com. And I'm going to pass in password, where my password will be fr. And let's see what this does. Okay, so I get a username error telling me, hey, this field is required. Let me take a look here at views. Or let's go to my serializer. So my username is not expecting that, or my create method is not expecting that, but it is looking for the validated data. So I'm assuming this is where the issue is coming from. I'm going to change this back to username. And what I'm going to do in my views is I'll just mutate my data, where I'll say data username is equal to data.get email. All right, my state reloader has been reloaded. Oh no. Now I have to do this all over again. Let's do email, fr@fr.com, and let's do password, which should be fr. I send my post request, and here's my token. And it looks like I misspelled token, and I just put toke. All right. Let me go ahead and copy this just so I can make sure that I have this token still. All right, so there's my post view. Seems to be working correctly, and I can actually grab my token to make a series of requests. Does anyone have any questions up to this point?
I noticed that you have the dot save in your serializers and the views. Is it necessary in both, or is it like a safety measure?
Yeah, that's a great question. So the is valid that is being triggered here, this is valid function is essentially the full clean method, where we're checking all of our validators, whether they're built in into the model that we're utilizing, or if they're our own built-in validators that we've created, right? So that's what is valid does. Now the save of this function that is happening here is not the same thing as model.save. These are not the same. What this save method does is it belongs to the serializer, and that is what actually triggers the create method. So here's where we make an entry into the database. This dot save is making an entry into the database because this is referencing the client model. This dot save is triggering our client serializer create method. Does that answer your question?
Yes. I think I am a little bit confused on how the client serializer and the client are the same thing because the client's in the serializer.
Yes, absolutely. So the client serializer is an instance of a model serializer, right? So when I trigger this dot save, this is the dot save method that belongs to the model serializer, which is happening right here. All right, here's our model serializer. When I trigger dot save, that is stating, hey, utilize the create function. Now, the dot save that we see down here, this is in reference to the client, and the client is a model, not a model serializer. So they share the same naming convention because they're supposed to accomplish the same behavior, but they're the same behavior at different levels. Did that help clarify things?
Yes, definitely. Thank you.
Of course. All right. Any other questions? All right. Now I do want to add my token in here as a field. So I'm going to go ahead and do this rather than doing it manually. I'm going to have this be a serializer method field that is going to be a read only. And this serializer method field is going to be def get token, which is going to take in self and the object. And what we're going to return will be object.auth token.key. That way we don't have to worry about redesigning everything all over again. Instead, in my views, instead of having this new client.save, well, now I can just return my client.data. Let's go ahead and try this out. Oh, let's do email, ab@ab.com, and let's do password, being password. Now, when I send my request, this gives me a more extensive response. There's probably a couple of other things that I want to set to read only. For example, is super user. That's definitely something that I shouldn't want to expose. Um, is staff also something that I don't want to expose? I don't want to expose groups nor user permissions. So I could add that to the corgs as well. Let's go ahead and go into our serializer.
What did you overwrite with the new client data?
This portion here.
Yes.
Got it. So before we were actually grabbing the client object, which was returned before, and then utilizing dot notation to access each one of those attributes. When I deleted that object and instead I passed in new client dot data, this dot data is coming straight from the serializer. And this is just
Okay.
utilizing the serializer.
Thank
Awesome.
you.
Of course. All right. Let's go over to my serializer. Let's do a couple of others. So we have our password, and I wanted to overwrite is super user. I don't want to expose that. And I don't want to expose if it's a staff. I also don't want to expose if this is, oh, I don't want to expose the groups that they belong to. And I don't want to expose the permissions. All right. I'm just going to make an example client here. This might help me write my user a little bit more efficiently. Let's go ahead and do email, ac@ac.com. And let's do password. Yes. Let's send this request one more time to make sure that everything is properly formatted. And there you go. Now there's no exposure over any sort of security data. I'm just simply sending the token, last login, their username, first name, last name, etc. All right, I could always have excluded those fields, but it's just a lot easier to actually put them in the write only functionality. If you exclude them, your serializer is really going to throw some errors when it comes down to writing, because it's going to say that, hey, I'm supposed to exclude these methods, but the model says it needs them, so I can't exclude them, and it would be contradicting back and forth. It's a lot easier to just put them under extra quirks. All right. I know this is new to us. We definitely didn't teach it, and we didn't end up making a client serializer, so I can understand why this one might be something difficult to really absorb. So I want to go ahead and pause here for a second. For your assessment, you shouldn't have to make a serializer that's this complicated, but it's definitely good information to know, especially now that we're starting to dive into our full stack applications. All right. At this point, does anyone have any questions over the client serializer?
Um, just more for professional development knowledge. So this is probably the best way to utilize, kind of like you said, the write only aspect for security reasons, going forward for like our personal project for building something. So we should try to use this type of stuff, this type of method to write our code.
Yes.
Okay.
All right. Awesome. It doesn't seem like we have any other questions, so let's go ahead and keep pushing forward to the others. There is the login method, which the login method should look pretty similar to what we have here, especially now that we have our serializer capabilities. The only thing that I do want to change is how I'm grabbing my token. Right, currently I'm grabbing my token through this object.auth token, but because I might be logging in, this token may not exist. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do this token.objects.get or create, which is going to return that tuple. And let me go ahead and do this underscore for that tuple here, where the user is equal to the object that I'm passing in. And then I could just return token.key. All right. Let's start working through this view of login. Now, in this view of login, I am going to need the authenticate method. So I'm going to say from Django.contrib.auth. I want to import authenticate. This is only going to receive a post request. So we have self, request, and data. Or excuse me, we don't have data. Data is going to be equal to request.data.copy. And here I'm going to go ahead and start authenticating my data. So I'm going to have my user, or excuse me, let's just call it a client, be equal to authenticate. This is going to take in credentials. So I'm going to pass in the username, which should be data.get email. And we should pass in the password, which should be data.get password. Once I've authenticated the user, so if not a client, if this comes back as none, I can return a response stating no user matching credentials and set this as a status of HTTP 404 for bad requests. Otherwise, I can return my clients or excuse me, return a response with my client serializer taking in the client data. All right. So this really shortens up my login method now. Let's go ahead and try to go to login. Can send the request. It tells me, hey, the get method's not allowed, but you can send a post method. Great. I think in my serializers, I have my example. Let me go ahead and try to log in. And there it is with my token. All right, so my login view has been implemented. Again, I receive a request. My email is my username. I then pass in the password. This is either going to return a user or none. If there is not a user, I send back, oh, I put HTTP 400. This should be HTTP 404. Not found. There you go. And then otherwise, we return the user's data component. All right. Does anyone have any questions regarding the login view?
Is that authenticate method checking that data against what's in the database?
Yes. So this authenticate method is checking the data against what's in the database. The special portion of the authenticate method is that when it comes to password, it unhashes the value that's in the database so that it could match the direct text that we're passing in.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Of course. Any other questions? Perfect. If there aren't any other questions, let's move into our logout view. So my logout view is going to receive a post request, which is going to be self and request. But my logout view is special because it's actually expecting there to be a user already. So I'm actually going to make a class of user views, or let's just keep the name consistency. So client views, which are going to inherit from API view. They're going to have authentication classes. And it's also going to have permission classes. For this to work properly, I'm going to need token authentication and is authenticated, both of which come from REST framework. So from REST framework dot permissions, I'm going to import is authenticated, and from REST framework dot authentication, I'll import token authentication. So this should give me token authentication and is authenticated. All right. I'm going to inherit from this client views. And now my post request is as simple as client be equal to request dot client, or excuse me, request dot user, I believe. And then from there, we could say that the name is equal, or let's just go ahead and say email, where we save the client dot email. And then we delete the client token. So client dot auth token dot delete. And I can return a response stating the email has been logged out with a status of HTTP 200. Okay. All right, let's try to send this request. I'm pretty sure that it's not going to let me due to having to include my token. So I may have to either utilize Postman or utilize a JavaScript script to send this request. Hopefully I don't. Let's try it. We're going to go over to logout. Okay, so this is definitely returning an issue. It's saying, hey, there was no token that was passed in. Let's see. Let's try to inspect network performance, memory. Nope, application. All right. I'm gonna have to create some sort of JavaScript to do this portion. So let me do that real quick. I'm just gonna copy what I had from yesterday. All right, I'm gonna change directory into client. And in here you can see I already have this package. Let me go ahead and open up main.js. I'm gonna delete all of these because I don't need them. All right, so here's my logout view. It's expecting a token. This should be going to clients/logout. And the token that I had, let me see here. I think I see that in my views. There you go. Here's the token. I can go ahead and bring it over and utilize it in main.js. So now if I run npm run requests, I never called the function, which might be important. I get AC at AC has been logged out. All right, there's all of my user functionality. The last part that I need to do is make sure that my info view works, which I'm pretty sure that's the GET request for a client, and retrieves details of a specific client. All right. Well, this one is going to be just my class of info, which is going to take in from my client view. And this is going to accept a GET request. All this is going to do is it's going to return a response, which is going to utilize my client serializer for request.user.data. All right. If I log in my user one more time, it's going to ask for this application information. Let me close everything that I don't need. Okay, so here's my user. I'm going to send my request. That should give me a new key. I'm going to grab this key. In main.js, I'm going to go ahead and add said key. And instead of post, I want this to go to get, and I want it to go to index. I'm just going to call this make request. All right. Now this view has been created, but I never tied it to a URL pattern. So I make sure that I do that. I'm going to bring in info. Here I'm going to do my path at index, which is going to utilize info as view. And now let's send this request. npm run requests. And there you go. there's my user with the key, his last login, etc., etc. Right? My get request is always bringing back my user. All right. There's all of my user functionality that has been completed. Next, we're going to go ahead and dive into the relationships and how that works. But before we move into all of that, does anyone have any questions over how we handle this user functionality?
In the login function, when you set data to the request data, you did copy at the end. What was that for?
Login function, are we talking about here?
Yeah.
Got you. So this request.data.copy, request.data is an object. When I run .copy, that is actually creating an exact copy of the request.data in a separate memory location. Now, why, right? Why even do anything like this of making a copy of the request? Well, when I make a copy of the request, sometimes I'm going to interact with the request. In this case, I was just getting a value. So there was really no necessity behind this other than just a shorter syntax, right? And I could just run data.get rather than doing request.data.get. But in the case that I need to mutate values that are coming into the data component, I don't want to mutate the original data that came in, right? I want to mutate a copy of it to whatever I need. So in case later on I need to reference back the original data that I received, I still have that in its own memory location. So it's just common practice to make a copy out of it. Does that answer your question, Erica?
Yes, thank you.
Is copy in Python a deep copy then?
Um, yes, it is. By deep copy and soft copy, are you mentioning where it's creating a hard separate memory location rather than a reference?
Yeah.
Yes, that's correct. So
So
it's a
you
hard,
could change anything you wanted in your new data and it wouldn't affect the old one.
and it wouldn't affect the old one. That's
Okay,
right.
awesome.
All right. Awesome. So there's all of our data here. All of our endpoints are now working for our client. The next step moving forward for a client, or excuse me, for this application is to get our read only. I think that's going to be our next easy functionality to implement. Hopefully we could implement that before the top of the hour. All right. Now, in this case, I'm actually going to need more real estate with VS Code. So I'm just going to make VS Code big. Going to close all of this because I'm not going to need it. And I'm going to worry about this book app. Well, in my book app, I've also been granted, other than models, I've been granted this books.json that I can utilize as a reference. And now I can make my model, right? So I have my class of book, where my book is a models.model. This book should have a title of models.charfield. It should have an author of models.charfield. Of course, you should have some validators. In this case, I'm not really going to overcomplicate it, and I'm going to leave it as a char field. Same thing with ISBN. This is a code, so ideally this should also have some sort of validator to make sure that this code is coming back formatted correctly. All right, you could see that the standard would be three numbers and then dash, and then I'm not too educated on ISBN, so I'm not sure how many follow-on numbers have to be continued after that. But this is definitely a formatted code. Then you can hard code a validator for it. All right. So there's ISBN, there's genre, which is also a models.char field. If you want to get fancy with genre, you could make it a models.choice field, and then you could implement choices. We don't have enough time to dive too much into that, and that's a more advanced model integration that you can do. And then finally, we go into publish date, which is a models.date field. All right. Does anyone have any questions about that so far? Okay, if no one has any questions about this, about how we're making this one-to-one relationship here between these two, let's go ahead and keep pushing forward and actually try to make this into a fixture file that we can utilize. And in order to do that, I'm actually going to leverage AI to help me out with this task. Let's go ahead and dive into good old ChatGPT. And in ChatGPT, I'm going to tell it, I have a Django project with an app named Book App. And the following model. Here I'm going to tell it the model that we're using. And then we're going to tell it, please convert the following JSON file into a JSON file representing fixtures I can load onto this model, where PK starts at 1. And then we give it our file. Now, this is my own ChatGPT model. It knows that I work inside of Django and React a lot, so it's probably not going to ask me any follow-on questions. And I also have it set up so that it doesn't ask me too many declaring questions, and already set up a couple of assumed values. You could also see here that it has some knowledge that it's already utilizing. So this is going to give me a pretty straightforward answer. You may have to do a little bit of a more extensive explanation. All right, so here it starts creating my JSON file. It tells me, hey, Django fixtures require each to record the following: an app label and the model name, the primary key, and then the fields in a dictionary. All right, you can see how it's providing it for me. So there's the books app.book. It should go down all the way to book 9. Okay, it's done and over with. Now that that's completed, I can make a directory within the book app called fixtures. And in this fixtures, I can make a book data.json. Now this book data.json, here's my book app, here's my fixtures, and I can include book data.json. Well, you can notice that it's even kind enough to tell me, hey, once you're ready to push this up, you can load this utilizing the following commands. All right. In this case, I tried naming it books.json. I'm actually going to be a little bit more descriptive. So I'm going to say load data from my book app, fixtures, book data.json. That rose a couple of issues. That's because currently I don't have this book already in my database. So let's do Python -py, make migrations. Let's do Python -py migrate. And then let's load our data. All right, and now it tells me, hey, you installed 9 objects from one fixture. Fantastic. So now all 9 of these books are inside of my database, and I can go ahead and create that read functionality for these books. Does anyone have any questions over how we got these fixtures? All right, awesome. I'm going to go ahead and touch into my book app, urls.py. I'm also going to make serializers.py. Let's start off with our serializers. We can make my class of book serializer, which is going to inherit from a model serializer. Let's say from REST framework dot serializers. I want to import model serializer. Here's my class meta, which would reference the book. So from .models, import book. Here we can make the model be equal to book, and we can make the fields be equal to all. There's really nothing too fancy to add to this serializer. This should do the trick for us. Now we can dive into our views. We can say from REST framework dot views, I want to import API view. From REST framework dot response, I want to import response. From serializers, I want to import my book serializer and my book. From shortcuts, I'm going to need my get object or 404. And I believe that's everything that I'll need. Hopefully I'm not surprised later on. Here we're going to do our all books, which should inherit from API view. This is going to handle self. A request. And it's going to return book serializers. Actually, it's going to return a response. Where I'm going to want my book serializers to grab all of my books. Because there's many of them, I want this many equals true. Then I'm going to have a book, which should handle an API view. This should have a get method that takes in self, request, and book ID. This should grab a book, where we're going to utilize this get object or 404. We're going to pass in book and state that where ID is equal to book ID. And then we can return a response that takes in the book serializer at book dot data. And I almost messed this up. This needs the dot data. All right. So this is grabbing one singular book. This is grabbing all of our books. We're utilizing get object or 404 to throw an error early if we need to. And now in URLs, I can say from Django.urls, I want to import path, specify our URL patterns, and we can state path at index should return all books. So I'll say from.views. I want to import all books, and I want to import a book. This is going to take an integer of book ID, which is our parameter, and grab a book as viewed. All right. Finally, we can tie this to our actual project, where we can bring path of API/books. This should then attach us to include our book app dot URLs. All right. Again, this is API/books that ties us to our URLs. Our URL at index will trigger the all book views. This all book grabs all of the books from our database, passes it into the serializer with many equals true. In the case that we receive a book ID, that will trigger our a book view, where we'll either get an object or throw a 404 error, and then return a response with that singular book's data. Let's try this out. We're going to go to books. This returns all 9 of my books. And if I were to send the ID of 8, then I'll receive my ID of 8. And there's my book ID. All right. This one was a lot simpler than our views for our user, but I'm sure there are some questions. Does anyone have any questions over how we created our serializer and URL patterns for grabbing a book or grabbing all books? All right, it doesn't seem like we have any questions. The last portion that we have is going to be the rentals app. And unfortunately, we are going to have to come back together later on for finishing this rentals app. I'm going to go ahead and stop our recording here.